Hey, this is Darren from Old Forge Brewing Company, and I made a barley wine about 8 months ago. And then I barrel aged it for pretty much that entire 8 months. So one of my coworkers asked me the other day, is a barley wine more like a beer or a wine? And I thought that was a really interesting question because oftentimes I get so tied up in the jargon of beer, I don't really think about the etymology of the terms we use or what they mean to anyone else besides myself. So a barley wine is a beer. It's made just like a beer. We make it in the brew house here. We extract the sugars from malted barley and we boil them with hops and we ferment it just like any other beer. And the main difference with this is it's typically higher in alcohol, and then it can or cannot be aged, but that aging gives it flavors that are more similar to a wine, which is where the term barley wine comes from. It's basically similar to a wine, but made with barley like you make any other beer. But make no mistake, it is more like a beer than a wine. It just has some of those characteristics of a wine. Let's give it a try. All right, so what I get right up front is a little bit of a sherry aroma. And that comes from the fact that we age it for so long in oak barrels. Since the oak is porous, there's a little bit of micro-oxidation going on in there, and that oxygen that picks up creates the same flavors and aromas you would get from sherry. All right, so right up front, malty sweetness. Really well balanced malt though, not too toasty, not too light, really well balanced. Gives way to a fruity character. So like I'm getting a lot of cherry that goes into like a sour cherry, which is really interesting because the only yeast we added to this was just our regular beer yeast. We didn't add any extra things like Brettanomyces or lactobacillus or anything like that. So it's interesting to get that little bit of that sour character. It gives us some really good depth of flavor. And then it kind of goes into a little bit of toasty flavor and then a little bit of bitterness too, just like the slightest hint of bitterness. It's not overpowering, it's not off-putting. The funny thing about a beer like a barley wine is you actually hop it pretty highly. So it's got a high IBU rating, it's got a lot of hops in it, but that 8-month barrel aging will actually mellow all those flavors out so that malt flavor can come through more. And that was advantageous back in the late 19th century when they first started making these, because the hops will actually help act as a preservative to keep it from going bad. So even though that there's a lot in there, they mellow out and they just kind of become part of a background note. Whereas the main flavors you get is still the maltiness and still all that aging character. Interestingly enough, this does not have a ton of oak character in it because this was, I think, the 4th beer we aged in these barrels. And after you age 2 or 3 beers, the oak character and whatever was in there before, in this case it was bourbon, that most of that flavor gets stripped out. So you don't get a lot of oak character. They're really just there to kind of give you that micro-oxidation, so you get the sherry flavors, you still get, a place to age your beer where it can just stay steady and around the same temperature for a while, and it's still a safe environment for the beer. So not a lot of oak character, but basically everything else I described all kind of mixing together and mellowing each other out, which is really interesting effect. Yeah, this is a winter warmer for sure, so perfect time of year for this. So yeah, stop in for the first time this week. 15th anniversary barley wine on tap now. Thank you.